Decoded.
Welcome back, everyone, to Book Decoded. I'm so excited for today's episode because we're diving into a book that really gets you thinking. It's called The Uncanny Muse by David Hajdu, and it's all about this fascinating and sometimes a little creepy relationship between humans, machines, and art. And, we always say on this show that we love to dig into the big ideas and, really think about how they connect to our lives. And this book is like packed with them.
Oh, it is. It's amazing how Hajdu takes us on this journey from these early, clockwork machines all the way to artificial intelligence and how they've influenced our understanding of art.
It's wild, right? Like, who would have thought that? Centuries ago, people were already grappling with these questions.
It blows your mind that people were already thinking about these things back then.
Yeah. And the thing is, these questions are even more relevant now than ever with AI exploding.
Absolutely. It's like everything Hajdu talks about in the book is suddenly happening all around us.
Exactly. So let's jump right in. One of the first things that Hajdu does in the book is he takes us to this art gallery in New York.
Okay.
And it's a show of algorithmic art. Basically, art created by AI.
Okay. Yeah, I've seen some of that stuff online. It's pretty wild.
It is. And Hajdu describes how Ahmet Eldamal, who is one of the artists featured in the show, is there at the gallery.
Yeah.
And he's kind of observing people's reactions to his work.
I bet that was interesting. I mean, how do people react to seeing art made by a machine?
Yeah, well, it's funny because Hajdu says that people were whispering things like, fascinating, God, it's inhuman, or what's the point?
I can see that some people will be really intrigued and others would be totally freaked out.
Exactly. And some people were even saying is this even real art?
Right, because it challenges our whole definition of what art is supposed to be.
Totally. And that's what's so cool about this book is that it really gets you thinking about these fundamental questions.
Yeah, for sure.
So from there, Hajdu takes us back in time, way back to the 19th century.
Okay.
And he introduces us to this guy named John Neville Maskelyne.
Okay.
Who was a stage magician, kind of like a Houdini of his time.
I love those old-time magicians. They were so clever with their tricks and illusions.
I know. And Maskelyne was really interesting because he was super skeptical of spiritualism.
Oh, yeah. Spiritualism, that was the big thing back then.
Right. It was huge. People were holding seances, trying to communicate with spirits. And Maskelyne thought a lot of it was just trickery.
Yeah, makes sense. I mean, if anyone could spot a fake, it would be a magician, right?
Exactly. So Maskelyne decided to expose these fraudulent spiritualists by using his own illusions.
Oh, that's clever. So he was fighting fire with fire.
Yeah, he built these amazing automata, which were mechanical figures that appeared to move and even think on their own.
So robots, basically.
Kind of, but this was way before the word robot was even invented.
Wow, so this was really early robotics.
Yeah, they were super intricate, and two of his most famous automata were named Zoe and Psycho.
Psycho? That's a kind of creepy name for a machine.
I know, right?
Yeah.
But Psycho was this figure that was described as a dark-skinned mystery man. And he could supposedly do math problems and play cards.
No way. Serious?
Seriously. But here's the thing. The secret behind these automata was that Maskelyne's partner, Cook, was actually hidden underneath the stage.
Aha, so he was controlling them the whole time.
Yeah, it was all an illusion, but a really convincing one.
I can imagine people would have been totally blown away by this back then.
Oh, absolutely. They thought these machines were really acting on their own.
That's wild.
Yeah.
It makes you think about how we perceive intelligence, right?
It does. And it gets even more interesting when you realize that Psycho kind of resembled this earlier chess-playing automaton called the Turk.
Oh, yeah, I've heard of that one. It was this cabinet with a mechanical figure inside that played chess.
Exactly. And the Turk also featured a dark-skinned figure
in
a turban. And Hajdu points out that there were definitely some racist undertones there.
Oh, for sure. Associating these mysterious abilities with a certain race. It's messed up, but it shows how technology reflects the biases of its time.
It's never neutral. It's always shaped by the culture it comes from.
Absolutely.
So after Maskelyne and his automata, Hajdu introduces us to this whole cast of other mechanical people acts that were popular back then.
Really? What kind of acts?
Well, there was Zutka the Mysterious, who could supposedly read minds, and Weston the Walking Automation, who well walked.
Okay.
And then there was Moto Girl, who played the violin.
Moto Girl. That sounds kind of awesome.
She does, right?
Yeah.
And Hajdu describes this poster of her from Paris in 1903. And she's wearing this gorgeous gown and playing this beautiful violin. But then you notice these electrical wires coming out from under her skirt.
Wait, what? Electrical wires?
Yeah. It's like this subtle hint that she's not all she appears to be.
That's so cool. I love that kind of visual storytelling.
Me too. It's like this little peek behind the curtain.
Yeah.
So from these theatrical illusions, Hajdu then shifts gears, and he takes us into the world of philosophy.
Okay.
He talks about this 18th century thinker named Lametri,
Geometry. All right.
who basically argued that human beings are essentially machines. He said that we're capable of thought because of our physical makeup.
That's a pretty radical idea, especially back then.
He was way ahead of his time. And he didn't just talk the talk. He also lived a pretty wild lifestyle, kind of embracing this whole materialist worldview.
Interesting. So he was like a real-life example of his philosophy.
Yeah, he was. And Hajdu contrasts Lametri's view with another argument from that time period. This one comes from Cleanthes,
Cleanthes.
who's a character in David Hume's writings.
Yeah. I know Hume. He was a big deal philosopher.
Exactly. So Cleanthes uses this analogy of a really complex machine, like a clock, to argue that the natural world, with all its intricate workings, must have also been designed by an intelligent creator.
Oh, wow. So it's like using the machine analogy to prove the existence of God.
Right. It's kind of the opposite of Lametri's view.
That's fascinating how the same analogy can be used to support totally different ideas.
It shows how these ideas about humans and machines were really central to how people were trying to understand the world around them.
For sure.
And then Hajdu goes on to trace how this human-machine analogy evolved over time. Like in Descartes' time, saying man is a machine was often about emphasizing the mind over the body.
Okay.
But then with the Industrial Revolution, the machine became this symbol of progress and efficiency, and it started to shape how people thought about work and even their own identities.
That makes sense. Like as machines became more prevalent in society, they started to influence how we saw ourselves.
Exactly. Okay, so let's move on to music, because that's where things get really interesting in terms of this human-machine dynamic.
Okay, I'm all ears.
So Hajdu talks about this incredible creation by Henri-Louis Jacques-Rose. It was this automated girl who played the organ.
What? An organ-playing robot in the 1700s?
I know, it's mind-blowing, right? And what was so captivating about her was that you could actually see all her mechanics working as she played.
So it wasn't trying to hide the fact that she was a machine?
Not at all. It was like the mechanics were part of the performance. And Hajdu says that this actually made her seem more lifelike.
That's interesting. So like by showing the mechanics, it somehow made her seem more human.
Yeah, like the audience could connect with the effort and the complexity of her movements.
I wonder if it's because it made her seem more real in a way. Like we could understand how she worked.
Maybe. And then we get to Max Ortman, who was this researcher who studied the mechanics of piano playing.
Oh, wow. So like the physics of how our fingers move on the keys.
Exactly. He used x-rays and all sorts of techniques to analyze how pianists played. And his conclusion was that at the keyboard, the human body essentially becomes a machine.
So like our bodies are just following mechanical laws.
That's what he believed. And it's kind of mind-blowing when you think about it.
It is. It's like we're both the artist and the instrument.
Right. And this leads us to the world of automatic music players. Things like orchestra boxes and player pianos.
Oh, yeah, player pianos. Those are so cool.
They are. And they were incredible feats of engineering. They used these cylinders or rolls of paper that were encoded with musical information. It was like a pre-digital form of programming.
Wow. So they were like the first computers in a way.
Kind of. They were definitely pushing the boundaries of what technology could do with music.
Yeah.
And while they couldn't fully replicate the nuances of every instrument, like the violin, they did open up some really interesting possibilities.
Like what?
Well, for one thing, because the player piano wasn't limited by human physical limitations, it could play music. That was way more complex than any human pianist could handle.
That's awesome.
Yeah.
So they were actually expanding the possibilities of music.
Exactly. And then there were these roll editors who would arrange and even embellish existing pieces for the player piano.
So it was like a whole new form of musical collaboration.
It was. And Hajdu even mentions how composers like Stravinsky were experimenting with writing music specifically for the player piano.
Wow, Stravinsky. That's amazing.
It is. It shows how these machines were influencing even the most avant-garde composers of the time.
For sure.
Now, here's a funny thing. While some classical musicians were really suspicious of player piano's ragtime music, totally embraced it.
No, yeah, ragtime. That makes sense. Like all the syncopation and fast rhythms.
Right. It was a perfect match for the player piano's capabilities. This whole discussion about player pianos makes you realize that even a regular piano is a machine at its core.
That's true. We often forget about the mechanics when we're listening to a beautiful performance.
Yeah. Hajdu even quotes the pianist Donald Shirley, who called the piano a machine with a brain.
A machine with a brain.
Yeah.
I love that.
Me too. It's such a great way of putting it. Okay, so moving right along, Hajdu takes us to the Machine Age Exposition, which was held in New York in 1927.
The Machine Age exposition. What was that?
It was this incredible exhibition that was all about celebrating the beauty and power of machines.
Okay.
And it was organized by the Little Review, which was this magazine that was known for being really avant-garde.
So they were all about pushing boundaries.
Totally. And the Machine Age exposition was a big deal. They had all sorts of objects on display from everyday things, like kitchen appliances to scientific instruments.
Wow. So it wasn't just about art in the traditional sense.
No, it was about seeing the artistry in the machines themselves. And get this, the judges actually chose a simple stainless steel spring as an object of beauty.
A spring? Really?
Yeah. They praised its perfect form and its machine-made precision.
That's so cool. It's like they were saying that beauty can be found in the most unexpected places.
Exactly. And then we start to see the shift from purely mechanical devices to electronic technologies, which obviously had a huge impact on music.
Yeah, for sure. Like electronics completely revolutionized music.
They did. And Hajdu introduces us to Vaughn DeLeith, who was known as the Radio Girl.
The Radio Girl. That's a cool nickname.
She was one of the pioneers of radio broadcasting. And she used these early vacuum tubes to transmit music over the airwaves.
Wow, so she was like one of the first people to bring music into people's homes electronically.
She was. And the thing is, microphones and amplifiers allowed singers to adopt a much softer, more intimate style, which became known as crooning.
Oh, yeah, crooning. I can see how that would be different from the more powerful operatic singing that came before.
Right. And believe it or not, some critics actually saw crooning as cheating or even degenerate.
Seriously, what? Why?
They thought it was somehow undermining traditional masculinity.
That's so ridiculous. It's just a different style of singing.
I know. But it shows how new technologies can really shake things up and even challenge social norms. And as recording technology kept evolving, we got more sophisticated playback devices. And Hajdu uses the Beatles' S.G. Pepper's Lonely Hearts Club Band as an example of how the recording studio itself became an instrument.
Oh, yeah, Sgt. Pepper. That album was groundbreaking.
It was full of experimental sounds and techniques that could only be created in the studio.
Right. It wasn't just about recording the band live anymore. It was about creating a whole new sonic experience.
Exactly. And this idea of the recording itself becoming the art form is a really important shift. It changes the whole game.
For sure.
Okay, so while all this was happening in the world of electronic music, we also had the rise of electrified blues.
Electrified blues, okay.
Yeah, it was this raw, powerful sound that emerged in the urban centers of North America. And it was really rooted in the Black experience in these cities. Artists like Muddy Waters and James Cotton were key figures in this movement.
I love Muddy Waters. His music is so full of energy.
It is. And the electric guitar gave blues this whole new edge. It was amplified and distorted, and it really reflected the intensity of urban life.
That's so interesting how the sound of the music mirrors the environment it comes from.
Right. And then you have someone like Iggy Pop, who was actually inspired by industrial sounds.
Industrial sounds? Like what?
He grew up near the River Rouge factory in Detroit.
Yeah.
And he was fascinated by the clanging and banging of the machinery.
Wow. So he found music in the noise.
He did. And he wanted his own music to have that same raw, visceral power.
I can hear that in his music. It's definitely got that industrial edge.
It does. John Cale even described the Stooges' music as mainly noise, but also powerful and frightening.
Yeah, that makes sense. It's like the sound of the machine age, but amplified and turned into music.
Exactly. So this brings us to the early days of computer music and art, which is where things get really futuristic.
Okay, bring on the robots.
Well, not quite robots, but definitely computers. So Hajdu talks about Lejeron Hiller, who created the Iliac Suite.
The Iliac Suite, what's that?
It is the first piece of classical music composed by a computer.
No way, seriously. A computer composed music back then?
It was created in 1957 using this massive computer called the Iliac.
That's incredible. So how did people react to it?
Well, as you can imagine, it caused quite a stir. Some people were amazed by it, but others were really skeptical. They called it anti-humanist and said it was taking away from the creative spirit of music.
That's interesting. It's like they saw the computer as a threat to human creativity.
Yeah, it was definitely a challenge to traditional ideas about what it means to be a composer. But Hiller himself saw it as a collaboration. He thought that all creative work could ultimately be expressed as computer code.
Wow, that's a pretty radical idea.
It is, and it's even more radical when you consider that.
Yeah.
Most uses of computers in music at that time were just for playback.
Right, so this was a whole new way of thinking about computers and creativity.
Exactly. And then in the visual arts, we have Michael Knoll, who was doing some really cool experiments at Bell Labs. He was using a microfilm plotter to create computer-generated art.
So like early digital art.
Yeah, it was pretty basic stuff, mostly geometric shapes and patterns, but it's still groundbreaking. He and another artist, Bella Jules, even had one of the first gallery shows of computer art.
Wow, that's amazing. I wonder how people reacted to it back then.
Well, not so well. Actually, Hajdu says that the art world wasn't quite ready to embrace it. They weren't selling any pieces.
I guess it takes time for people to accept new forms of art.
It does. And speaking of new forms of art, Hajdu talks about Max Binz, who coined the term artificial art.
Artificial art.
Mm.
I like that.
And there was also Frieder Nake, who was using algorithms to create art that emulated the style of Paul Klee.
So he was like teaching the computer to paint like Klee?
Kind of. It was all about exploring the creative potential of code and mathematical rules.
That's fascinating. It's like a whole new way of thinking.
Yeah.
About artistic style and technique.
Totally. And then we get to the Cybernetic Serendipity exhibition, which was held at MoMA in 1968.
MoMA. Wow, that's a big deal.
It was a huge deal. It was one of the first major exhibitions to showcase art created in collaboration with machines. They had Jan Tingley's kinetic sculptures and all sorts of other technological artworks.
So they were really trying to bridge the gap between art and technology.
They were. But even then, a lot of critics were still struggling with the idea of art that wasn't solely made by human hands.
Right. It's like they couldn't wrap their heads around the idea of a machine being creative.
Yeah, and one critic, Barbara Gold, pointed out that even though computers could generate infinite possibilities, humans were still the ones making the initial choices and setting the parameters.
That's a good point. Like the computer is a tool, but it's still guided by human intention.
Exactly. And then you have Harold Cohen, who created this program called Aaron that could generate drawings.
Oh, wow. I've seen some of Aaron's drawings. They're actually pretty good.
They are. And Cohen even said that he didn't actually do the drawings.
Wait, what? So if he didn't do them, who did?
That's the question, right? He said that Aaron was making its own artistic decisions within the parameters that he had set.
That's trippy. It really makes you think about the nature of authorship.
It does. And then there's George Lewis, who was using a computer called the Kim 1 for musical improvisation.
Improvisation. That's cool. So the computer was like a jazz musician.
Kind of. Lewis was trying to blur the lines between composer and performer and between human and non-human creators.
Wow, that's deep. So he was basically saying that the computer could be a true creative partner.
Exactly. And this brings us to the more recent developments in AI and art, which are happening so fast it's hard to keep up.
I know. It's like every day there's a new AI that can do something amazing.
Right. So Hajdu talks about Simon Colton, who created the painting fool.
The painting fool. Okay, that one sounds familiar.
And it's interesting because Colton wasn't just trying to get the computer to generate images. He was trying to get it to understand the challenges of the creative process.
So he was trying to make the AI more human in a way.
Kind of. He was interested in what creativity might mean for a machine.
That's a really interesting question. Like, can machines really be creative? Or is it just mimicking human creativity?
That's the big question, right?
Yeah.
And then we have generative adversarial networks, or GANs.
GANs. Yeah, I've heard of those. They're the ones that create those super realistic images, right?
Yeah, they're pretty incredible.
Yeah.
GANs basically work by having two AI systems compete against each other. One tries to generate realistic images, and the other tries to detect the fakes.
Mm-hmm.
And through this process, they both get better and better until they're producing images that are almost indistinguishable from real photographs.
Wow. So it's like they're teaching each other?
Exactly. And one of the most famous examples of GAN art is the portrait of Edmund de Bellamy.
Oh, yeah. That one sold for a ton of money at auction.
It did, which was super controversial. Some people were like, this is the future of art, and others were like, this is just a gimmick.
Yeah. I can see both sides of that argument.
Me too.
Yeah.
It's definitely a conversation starter. And then there's Ahmed Elgamol, who's working on this AI called ACAN. And ACAN is different from other AI art generators because it's designed to create art that's stylistically ambiguous.
Stylistically ambiguous? What does that mean?
It means that it doesn't just try to copy existing styles.
Yeah.
It tries to create something truly new and original.
Oh, wow. So it's like pushing the boundaries of what AI art can be.
Exactly. And then, of course, we can't forget about things like ChatGPT, which can write text that's almost indistinguishable from human writing.
Yeah, ChatGPT is mind-blowing. It can write poems, scripts, even code.
I know. It's crazy. And then there's Idiva, who's an actual robot artist.
A robot artist? Seriously?
Seriously. She can paint, draw, and even perform, which raises all sorts of questions about whether machines can truly understand and express emotions.
That's getting into some deep philosophical territory.
It is. And it brings us full circle back to those early automata that we talked about at the beginning.
Right. It's like we're still grappling with the same fundamental questions about what it means to be human.
Exactly. So I think the main takeaway from the Uncanny Muse is that this whole relationship between humans, machines, and art is constantly evolving. It's this ongoing conversation that makes us question our own creativity and what it means to be human.
Absolutely. And it's a conversation that's only going to get more intense as AI continues to develop.
So on that note, here's a final thought for everyone listening. If we've come this far from clockwork machines to AI artists,
Oh.
what does the future hold for this relationship? Will machines ever truly be creative? Or will they always be? Just reflections of our own creativity. It's something to ponder.
It definitely is. It's a question that's going to keep us all thinking.
Thanks for joining us on this deep dive into the Uncanny Muse. It's been a wild ride.
It has. Until next time.